Hello.
Our story begins with a split-second decision, a response to something Luxx said. Ahsoka had been flirting with the idea of joining Bonteri on his righteous quest to stop Dooku. Their recent encounter with the Death Watch wasn't her favorite thing ever, and it was a bit of a dumb idea on his part. But, in all fairness to him, most people in the galaxy didn't know about Death Watch and their tactics. They were a group of marauders that only the Mandalorian throne needed to be concerned with. As Luxx told her that they would see each other again, she proclaimed in a momentary outburst that she wouldn't remain a Jedi, she'd leave and join him on his crusade. Luxx was shocked for a moment, and he questioned surprisingly back at her. She affirmatively stood on her ground, not thinking about what repercussions this could have outwardly. She knew this is where she wanted to be, and Ahsoka told Luxx that she wouldn't return to Coruscant if it meant that they could continue working together. He readily prepared to open the escape pod he stood within, when it jettisoned. Luxx initially planned out an exciting and dramatic finality to their little side quest, and never expected her to join him. Now they had to go through the whole process of docking the ship, and then joining inside the main ship again, but it was a little funny moment that made Luxx look a little more goofy. Now that she had stated her case, Ahsoka asked what he thought he was going to do to stop Dooku. He didn't know, but he had a couple other ideas. There were some pirate factions that had been dealt unfavorable hands, like Death Watch. However, he wasn't as inclined to work with someone like Hondo Ohnaka because of their recent experience with Death Watch. She was proud that he was finally learning, but small galaxy it seemed. He'd already intended on meeting up with two individuals she had experience with, Pre-Vizsla and now Hondo, so she suggested he dig a little bit deeper. There was a suggestion for a potential rebellion on Onderon. Ahsoka thought this to be a better idea, but sparking a revolution in the midst of a galactic civil war wouldn't even be a blip on Dooku's radar. She understood that he was suffering, and without the proper mindset to plan his actual revenge against the Sith Lord, but they needed a better array of combating the Count. Luxx sighed and sat down. To be honest, he didn't really have any other contacts aside from Hondo or Steel Guerrera on Onderon. Ahsoka looked to R2, who was unceremoniously joining them on this expedition. The droid beeped a few suggestions and Ahsoka leaned on her own chair and pondered for a moment. There were no simple means to destroying the Count who murdered Luxx's mother. They sat in silence and walked through different potential routes and even outcomes of such directions. It was difficult, because Ahsoka knew without a doubt that she wouldn't survive a duel with Tyrannus. It was also no help that Luxx couldn't fight worth a wit, and he had managed to become the brains of the operation, which had to change right now. Ahsoka told the two of them that if they wanted to kill Dooku, then perhaps the best path forward was being on Sereno. Luxx asked what good would that do, and she explained that on the ground they might be able to get an idea of how the populace felt about him. A rebellion on Onderon might not do anything, but Sereno? That could cause a rupture within their Senate, though there was something important for Ahsoka to note. Senator Padme Amidala felt that the death of Mina Bonteri went to something bigger. In the Senate, she suggested that someone with more influence than Dooku was manipulating the war. In confidence, Padme told Ahsoka that the banking clans likely had something to do with it. Thanks to the Separatists purchasing 3 million more battle droids, and the Republic doing the same with 5 million more clones, they were profiting off of the war unlike anyone else. The interest rates were apparently 25%, and part of this came from the Republic's resolve on deregulating the banks. Luxx's fist balled, but Ahsoka suggested that maybe insight on Sereno could be their best path forward. She also was very adamant that they focus on patience. His reluctance to play things out could cost them both of their lives, so she explained that while she might not be a Jedi anymore, she had the experience of a commander and a Jedi. She would effectively be taking command over their little adventure. Luxx leaned back in his chair in agreement to this compromise, and R2 whirled in excitement. When they found home on Sereno, they hid their starship in the forests. They weren't officially permitted to land on the surface of the planet, not that they tried to ask for permission anyways. But they were making sure they had a functional home, an escape route, and the secrecy of their intentions. They couldn't necessarily carry on with living in a city that wouldn't be accepting of 2 new citizens and their droid without any sort of documentation. And these two had no doubt that Ahsoka's Jedi past would be a key sense of interest for Dooku if anyone found out. The trio entered the capital town of Sereno, which sat underneath the Count's castle. They continued with the little betrothed ruse for the time being. Both were into the idea to varying degrees, so they might as well keep it up for their own sake. It was this exciting chase for the two of them, especially Ahsoka. As a Jedi, it was the forbidden path, something her master secretly partook in, so the apple didn't necessarily fall far from the tree. Ahsoka and Lux would operate out of Sereno for a couple of days, going into a couple of weeks. Their main objective was just understanding people. The locals very quickly caught on to the fact that these two weren't from Sereno, but they didn't snitch. Not because of loyalty to Count Dooku, more over the fact that they assumed these were the first two tourists seen on Sereno since before the war. This wasn't a totally incorrect observation. People used to come to their beautiful planet frequently. Now that war was the business of the galaxy, only rich people visited rich planets. Sereno's typically elitist society wasn't part of that same vast wealth anymore. They were often forgotten about, and now they had a separatist blockade sitting over their system, pushing even more tourists away from visiting their home. It wasn't the most desirable thing in the galaxy, to know that no one wanted to visit you, see your wonders, hear your history, or learn your culture, all because of something one man did. These people loved Dooku because he stood up to the Republic. Now he stole from them. He took their once decently sized wealth to fund his war. There were secrets to the conflict that not everyone knew, and as Luxx stated before, he wasn't cheering for the Republic to win, he just needed Count Dooku to lose. These aspirations weren't spoken about, but the people of Sereno were a mixed bag. The community was tight. Some had considered informing the battle droids, but there were fears that even stricter curfews or regulations and restrictions would be applied to them. They already couldn't import some of their favorite items, many of which came from neutral systems. It was an underwhelming scenario, but Dooku always promised. He and his government always promised, just like the Republic, more lies and more revelations for the two fake lovers. On Coruscant, Anakin was facing the High Council. He had tried to keep things quiet, but being that his vibrant apprentice was a missing case, they needed answers. Skywalker confirmed that he and Senator Amidala had spoken about Ahsoka's disappearance. Anakin was visibly distraught. His first and initial belief was that he had done something to push her away from the Order. She hadn't communicated with them at all. While this could be seen as another fall from grace like Tyrannus, Ahsoka was keeping her comms quiet due to their undercover mission. They didn't need to make themselves any more of a target to the Separatists. Skywalker was also upset about his beloved R2 unit. They had a special connection, and it was made even more important to him because R2 was his technical wedding ring. Thanks to the secrecy they held over their marriage, Padme and Anakin exchanged droids to each other. Now it felt like forever since he had been able to see his blue astromech. They'd been through so much together, and it felt like 2/3 of his entire self had been ripped away in one day. The Council wanted answers, and Skywalker told them everything he knew. He told them that Ahsoka rescued Luxx Bonteri from Mandalore when he tried to stand against Dooku during a peace talk session. Per Senator Amidala's personal first-hand memory, it seemed like Luxx had no ties left to the Separatists. One of the last things Ahsoka said to Padme was that the Separatists would execute Luxx, so Anakin didn't believe his apprentice had followed down the same path as Dooku. Master Windu suggested that they view this as an extension of Jedi operations. He then asked Skywalker if there was anything else he planned on doing. A wave of unease hit his face as he revealed that he had dispatched an elite unit of clones to track her down and save her. Ki-Adi-Mundi asked which group, and Anakin said that it was the Molinus 10. Yoda pressed his hand to his chin. This was an unexpected turn of events. They had just wanted the information. Now they knew a little too much. Anakin suggested that they could be useful in helping them with whatever they were doing. Realistically, there were two different potential scenarios. Either the team assisted Luxx and Ahsoka on their current mission, whatever that might be, or they would capture them. The Council was a little surprised by Anakin's resolve, but even though he didn't want the secondary outcome to be real, he needed to warn the clone squad of the potential danger they might face by trying to capture them. It was only fair to warn them in his opinion, but the Masters of the High Council gained a new sense of trust for Skywalker due to his ability to apparently put personal biases aside for the capture of his apprentice if it had to come to that. Since Padawan Tano was last seen near Mandalore, it would be best to put Anakin's division in that quadrant of the galaxy. He would accept these terms and load up with the 501st, as he prepared for their deployment, for the first time without Ahsoka since Christophsis. Back on Sereno, Ahsoka and Lux were continuing their little rendition of playing house. At this point, they were basically reliving an experience shared by Obi-Wan and Satine a decade and a half before. This was a unique situation that called for two young adults to be stuck in unlikely circumstances. By this point, Ahsoka did have her own reservations about the decision she made. Without the support of the Jedi, the galaxy felt small. No longer was trekking across the stars an easy or likely choice. It was something that would be a challenge for her and Luxx immensely. The life of a Jedi was hard, but there were certain luxuries that the Order didn't have to consider due to their long-standing position in the galaxy. As a result, she had to consider what it meant to step down from the Order in the way she had. Ahsoka had spoken to Luxx about it, because they did share similar beliefs, but more than anything, she talked to R2-D2. The feelings she felt were real, not just for Luxx, but for everything that she was experiencing at this moment in her life. Growing up under the shadow of war was never going to be easy, but having served as a commander, a Padawan, and a youngling, all in the last 3 years, she had to grievance over what she hadn't been able to experience. The Jedi she was told about as a child, when she was raised in their system, were unproblematic. Having seen the reality of tension in the galaxy, from the frustrations on Sereno to rumors of a slaver empire growing without Republic oversight, Ahsoka couldn't help but feel powerless as a Jedi. There was a status that came with the weapons and the robes, even if the individual wearing them didn't have such expertise. It was unfavorable across the board, and R2 was actually more understanding in this than Ahsoka ever thought he would be. But the astromech had to listen to Anakin's ramblings over and again. The droid understood as much as any droid couldn't, that this ordeal was frustrating for Ahsoka. She was without guidance, and now on the run with someone she knew so little about. They flirted on Raxus when they first met, but that didn't mean anything for knowing each other. He was seconds away from ditching her inside the ship, and she'd be remiss if she didn't at least consider the chance that he might do it again after he got what he wanted. Even if the Jedi teachings were guidance to avoid falling into darkness, there was a truth in every aspect of their grasp on people. Revenge would not give Luxx satisfaction, and how long it would be until the death of his mother could not be replaced by taking it out on someone else was unknown. How long until he realized that hurting another would never fill a hole in his heart? That was what Ahsoka had to ponder. She joined Luxx because Dooku was a net negative on the galaxy, but even in taking him out, could good be done? The people of Sereno were shockingly against him, but what did that mean for the two of them? Ahsoka had to think on this extensively. Not far from Ahsoka and Luxx on Karlak were the Death Watch. The pillaging group of Mandalorians continued to torture the local population until they spotted a Republic gunship. Well, they were spotted before they ever noticed the Republic, and the blue and white vessel ripped to the side and opened up the bay doors. Death Watch did not fear a clone competitor, but the squad Anakin sent to find Ahsoka was not just any group of clones. They were not a small group of commandos, they were not bad batches, they were something else. An elite group of ARCs, known for their efforts to defeat the Separatists earlier in the war. Alpha 77 led his boys out of the vessel and into the forests of Karlak. Pre-Vizsla was surprised by the quick assault, but the Molinus 10 did not mess around. Anakin told them about potential targets and things to worry about around Mandalore, and how Ahsoka was near Mandalore when they last heard from her. Karlak was a great spot to look, and the Death Watch quickly took up battle positions. Their men and women fighters sprawled out across their camp, with Bo-Katan leading a counter-assault. Thanks to their camp or fortress walls, Death Watch had ramparts for protection, but the gunship used by the Molinus 10 lifted off and vanished into the sky, giving the clones no air support, for now. Blasters covered the forest as Captain Fordo issued out silent commands with his hands. The clones dispersed through said forest, a couple of them engaging in hand-to-hand combat with the Mandalorians. The clones, though, were all but prepared for this encounter. They, using a variety of weapons, silenced Mandalorian lines. Captain Fordo, as he led his charge, was picked off the ground by Bo-Katan, who slammed him into the ground with her jetpack, giving her a boost. As Fordo lay there, with Death Watch guns fixating on him, the gunship rolled back through the base from behind, dropping explosives and sending a wave of detonations through the entire camp. Fordo inversely turned back and fired a round into Bo-Katan's jetpack, sending her flying into the air and detonating when she collided with a tree. One of the other clones helped Fordo up and asked if they fly now, and Fordo responded with a smile under his helmet, telling him they fly now. The Mandalorians were being mocked in the very place of their exile. The gunship escaped the fires that now covered the base, and the Molinus 10 continued to encircle the surviving Mandalorians. As a note, the bombing did not impact the tents around the base. It was a very targeted bombing run, just in case there were captives like Ahsoka and Lux inside of it. The clones continued firing into the Mandalorians, before executing the few who were too injured to escape. As they moved through the base, a very injured Pre-Vizsla tried to fight back, but Fordo kicked his helmet off of his face. He had been basically immolated from the bombs, and he watched the ARC trooper hand signal another order before picking up the darksaber off the ground. What a disappointment. The man who would never regard a clone as a true Mandalorian watched as a clone of a conquered Dawn Mandalorian take the prized darksaber and ignite it. Fordo laughed at the barbarism of these buffoons before accessorizing the saber and shooting Vizsla in the face without even looking in his direction. Death Watch was destroyed, completely slaughtered by the Molinus 10. Unfortunately for General Skywalker, they did not find Commander Tano, so they would keep looking. After a couple months into their stay on Sereno without outside contact, Ahsoka and Lux started to fit into a more complicated dynamic. Turns out their initial draw to each other wasn't just a fabrication of mind. They had a chance to get to know each other more during their stay, and nothing says romantic like assassinating a public figure together. Aside from finally figuring out how they planned to deal with Count Dooku, they spent a lot of time around each other. They were forced to, due to the little ruse they were playing. Even though it had been months since their arrival on Sereno, they didn't want to let down their guard for anyone. But on the bright side, this encouraged them to do more things in public, as a betrothed couple would. So romantic dinners at cantinas or amorous watchings of pod races were top of the list. However, despite their lovely idyllic time, they had their route. Turns out there was a small resistance on Sereno. It was an underground network that continuously got shut down by battle droids. And for the people who didn't know that Dooku was a Sith, they thought that they could kill him, like you could a regular public figure. Ahsoka dissuaded them from that line of thought, but the two of them would now be accessing the sewage tunnels, so that they could get into the actual castle itself. Thanks to the entire thing being situated on a mountain, it would be easier to enter the tunnels. They just needed to be discreet. Well, luckily for them, they wouldn't be alone. By this point, the High Council had given Anakin another apprentice, mostly just rushing Wookiee youngling, Gungi, through the last part of his youngling trials. But the Molinus 10 was still searching for Commander Tano. They didn't exclusively work on this because there were some other missions they had to attend to, so there were some weird shifts. The Molinus 10 shared time with other commandos or arcs from the 501st, meaning that some clones got really quick promotions to do this work for General Skywalker. Regardless, after one of their missions, a family member related to someone in the Sereno underground network informed the clone squad where the Jedi was. She was hidden on Dooku's home world, and the Molinus 10 quickly got to work, moving after her. They did inform Skywalker, but he was preoccupied at the moment, so he couldn't be of any assistance. On the same night Ahsoka and Lux prepared to bomb the castle into splinters, they were intercepted by the clones. Captain Fordo expressed some of Anakin's frustrations because this mission had gone on for too long in his eyes as well. They weren't even supposed to be here, but Skywalker outranked them so he could order them to do it. The clones did inform the two of them that they'd be joining them to hunt down and kill Dooku since they had a plan, but afterwards they were being sent back to Coruscant to get grounded. Neither of the two addressed this part. They just moved on with the rest of the plan and they revealed it. It was a simple plan, and having an elite squad like the Molinus 10 made their infiltration easier. They scaled the mountain in the middle of the night and slipped into the sewage tunnels. It wasn't the best smell ever, but it was for the right cause. When they did eventually enter the castle, they learned that Dooku wasn't even here. But not a terrible problem. Bombs and explosives were laid around the facility, trip mines essentially. The Molinus 10 were equipped with everything they might need for this particular scenario, so good thing they were here. Well, there was also a slight problem. Even though Dooku's flight plans were misconstrued for the underground movement, he was still coming home today. So they were kind of right. But also, it meant that once his solar sailor touched ground, the 12 infiltrators needed to get out immediately. Because the first bomb was a trigger, meant to collapse the entire facility without damaging the town beneath it. So once Dooku walked through the trip mine, he would set off an entire array of explosions. Quickly, Ahsoka shoved her boy toy into the sewage tunnels and told the clones to go first. The only one who didn't let her leave last was Fordo. They rushed down the harness lines and ran through the tunnel. As Ahsoka and then Fordo hit the bottom of the shaft, the entire ceiling lit up in fire, as a clone captain shoved Ahsoka out of the way and debris slammed down behind them. They weren't out of this yet either. Two other clones helped them off the ground, as Fordo tapped a button on his wrist and they continued rushing. Dooku was long dead, and every set of explosions continued to ripple across the castle. Debris slammed down past the clones as they continued running. One of them was speared in the leg by a pipe, but his brothers helped him up and kept him moving. As they got to the mouth of the tunnels, they jumped one by one into the gunship and it raced away from the finishing blow. When they eventually returned to the forest where Ahsoka and Lux had been living with R2, the clones told her to go and get the droid. They'd wait here. No more running, no more hiding, it was time to come home. Ahsoka nodded and rushed up the ramp. Lux was right behind her. R2 was sitting quietly waiting for them both to return, watching the smoke pillow out of the mountaintop for several minutes. Ahsoka knelt down and patted R2. As she prepared to turn around, Lux was pointing his blaster at her. He told her that he wasn't going back to Coruscant, and she with a subtle wave of the Force threw both the weapon and his hand backwards. She wasn't either, silly boy. Ahsoka laughed at him for thinking so little of her. He cocked his head in confusion as she told R2 to power up the engines and plot a course out of here. Lux was surprised she wasn't going to return home, but Ahsoka reminded him of their conversations. They both believed in the same thing, to varying degrees. At least have the wit to see this through before trying to shoot your girlfriend. Lux responded quickly. His what? Before we could get an answer, he was thrown backwards when the ship ripped out of the forest and pulled away from the camp. The clones were very irritated that they couldn't catch them inside the gunship, and the vessel that transported them through hyperspace was hiding on a nearby moon until they finished their mission. So now they were returning empty-handed. At least, Count Dooku was dead though. The news of this development eventually reached Anakin, and he was beyond enthralled. So happy that his student continued to vanish. Anakin was in a tough place. He had his new apprentice Gunji, and they were working with Ahsoka's old astromech, which was fine. But Anakin wanted to try and find her now. The Molinus 10 sadly did not get a tracker on her vessel, and they didn't know where they might be going, so Anakin was on his own from here. The worst part is, the Council trusted Anakin even more because he didn't totally flip out when Ahsoka vanished the first time. By the way, he definitely did, he just didn't do it in front of them. So with more trust than ever between him and the High Council, a new student, and an army to lead, what was he to do? Well, make a deal with Obi-Wan. It was literally the only thing he could do. And because Kenobi didn't watch Satine die for no reason yet, or fake his own death for some reason, he was willing to be a good friend here, for some reason. Gunji and Obi-Wan had a good connection, similar in a respect to the one shared between Ahsoka and himself, so he was perfectly fine with instructing Anakin's student during this time. Skywalker set off to find his first student, checking worlds near Sereno for her, and yet he was left with very little initial success. Unlike the Molinus 10 who picked up on a rumor, because the two lovers were working with the Sereno underworld, Anakin had nothing to go off of, because Ahsoka and Lux were on a completely different crusade now. Destroying Dooku had a major effect on the war initially, but it led to Palpatine activating one of his many contingency plans, in case it happened. Cities believed the Jedi might call out a hit on him, but honestly, this one seemed like it came from home. The representative from Sereno, appointed in Dooku's absence, spoke about the continuation of the war. This was more of the little people talking than the big heads of businesses. There was an urgency, suggesting that if the Neutral Systems Coalition could legitimize their movement, then they would end the war themselves. Call it a surrender or whatever, but it was a move that had the Confederacy in agreement. If they could be legitimized as an actual power in the galaxy, then they may continue their work without the corruption that destroyed the Republic. This quick switch-up inside the Confederacy was not in favor of the Republic war effort, but in favor of their own liberation and unity without war. The people of the galaxy were continuously growing tired of the conflict. No one was profiting off of it, and that's what this representative stated in his speech. He would be assassinated by Palpatine, and in a similar respect as it was following Bonteri death, there were more threats of assassinations. But the Confederacy united around this. Most systems did not face the cruelty that the people of Sereno faced under Dooku's rule, but they were willing to avoid Republic invasion. The previous line of assassinations went against Republic senators, so people from the Confederacy never faced these threats before. All they heard was Dooku's interpretation of Mina's death. Palpatine's adjustments, though, came with threats, not with political sway, but threats that would destroy the entire Confederate government. And this didn't totally have the effect he wanted. It was proof that someone else was behind the scenes, someone who probably killed Bonteri as well, and because Palpatine couldn't be at both locations at the same time, the eyes and ears of the Confederate Senate started to shift into more seclusive states. No longer did Bonteri's attack look like Republic slaughter, but a trick to deceive them into more conflict. Many people saw the first and true target to be the banking clans, and now they had to act. Lux and Ahsoka, on the other hand, were having the time of their lives. The people of Sereno were so grateful that they sent him additional credits to spend for freeing them. It was a digital transfer called StarPal. They got their credits and decided to live a little. They had been in the trenches for long enough, so they went to Cantonica for some euphoria. Because Cantonica was a big spender's location, they invited anyone to gamble. Not to steal, gamble. So as long as Ahsoka and Lux planned to spend money, they were free to come. The two of them were able to enjoy being in the other's presence for the first time without any other ulterior motives. Lux had gotten his revenge, and the truth is, he was content. Without having killed Dooku, he may have been pushed towards other forms of barbaric combat, but they had done something positive. Outside of that, he didn't really care what happened in the war, and while Ahsoka felt that to a degree, it was a bit different. She felt that the Jedi needed to resolve the problem of the war. She felt terrible for the clones, but that was beyond her power and she accepted that. All of her missions with Padme had radicalized her, to see that the Republic was a failed state. The Jedi were just stuck working on their behalf, as police and then enforcers. She understood and sympathized with the Confederacy and their quests for independence, but she wanted no part in it. Neither did Luxx. They'd also both come to the conclusion that they wanted to help people in their own ways. But first, they wanted to live a little, have some fun, enjoy being young for a while. They didn't have to commit themselves to anything, and that's what they did. Cantonica, despite being a capital for war dogs, did not promote the media. It was a neutral system, and it offered sanctuary from the political environment that encapsulated the galaxy. So while war dogs came here and they spent big, they also came here for the purpose of escape. Make your money, drink their booze, and forget about what you lost, or come back and spend what you made. It was heaven to many. Ahsoka and Lux started to see those qualities. Well, Anakin didn't. He had found them by accident. He caught wind of a trail in a neighboring system before following them to Cantonica. Oh boy, was he happy to see her. Funnily, Ahsoka and Lux were having a chat about Anakin. R2 was genuinely happy to not live in a forest for more than 5 minutes, and Ahsoka expressed that she felt bad about taking R2. Though the droid didn't seem to totally mind this adventure, because in his mind they were just on another mission, not running away from home. Like any good dog, R2 was just happy to be there. Anakin, inversely, was not. Lux stopped and told Ahsoka that surely Anakin could find another astromech, and yeah, he heard that. He wasn't very thrilled about hearing that, not in the slightest. He ignited his lightsaber and stood right behind Lux, and Lux then had to ask Ahsoka if Anakin was standing right behind him. The fury in Anakin's voice was pretty highlighted in this moment. He wasn't happy at all, truthfully speaking. Ahsoka hit Anakin with a, "Oh hey," and he responded with the very unenthused snips. She excused herself and her former master from Lux for a moment and asked what he was doing out here. He told her exactly what it was. He was looking for her so that he could bring her home and protect her. The Jedi Order needed her and she needed it. She listened and then stopped before sighing and speaking into a statement and telling him that she no longer needed the Order. She had found a path that called to her, one that made her happy. It may have not had all the luxuries of the Jedi Order, but they had made a difference. One crucial one is the death of Dooku. Anakin told her that the Jedi Order was her life. It wasn't something she could just throw away, not for nothing. She smiled and told him that she hadn't thrown it away for nothing. She found a happiness and a freedom she had longed for and didn't realize it. All of this wasn't because of something fundamentally wrong with the Order, but because he had taught her to think for herself. She looked down and paused before smiling again and telling him that it was something he always praised Qui-Gon for. She called him by his first name and told Anakin that he had fulfilled Qui-Gon's legacy. She found her path, she thought for herself, and because of him, she was more than equipped to face the galaxy, by herself or with Lux behind her. Anakin didn't want to let her go, but Ahsoka had made her choice. Not out of spite, nor out of desire to cease connection, but because she had found her path, the place where she could be happy and make a difference and still have a positive influence on people around her. It didn't come with the Senate badge that the Jedi had been dragging around for over a century. At that, though, Ahsoka placed her hand on Anakin's arm and thanked him for everything he had done for her. She was as complete as a person as she had ever been in her life, and without her teaching, she wouldn't have transitioned so easily into feeling that comfortable being who she was in this galaxy with her friend on her journey. Though she apologized, she couldn't continue holding R2 with her. She recognized that it was Anakin's droid, and he belonged with him. It was a very painful moment for Anakin, but also very rewarding. This was the true burden of being a master. Every student, no matter who, is meant to grow beyond them. Ahsoka had done that. She had crushed the generational trauma that infected Qui-Gon's or Dooku's lineage, one that started with the now-dead Dooku, continued with Qui-Gon's choice to remain in the Order, and Obi-Wan's decision to stay a Jedi, and Anakin's choice to hide his relationship. Ahsoka had found her path. She had found her direction, and Anakin had given her that. Something he should be immensely proud of. He should be just as proud as she was grateful. Ahsoka then placed into Anakin's hand her Padawan braid and a communication device. She never wanted to sever their connection or lose their friendship. He was her older brother in so many ways, and she loved him for that. It was a very emotional moment for both of them, and Anakin promised one thing. He promised that R7-A7 would find home with her again. She grinned and thanked him, before the two of them bear-hugged each other for what felt like an eternity. This was home for both of them. They were true siblings, sharing a mutual love that couldn't be found as Jedi. The bond of master and apprentice was just as important as the one shared between brother and sister. But for now, Ahsoka needed to grow on her own, and that would be okay for both of them. Anakin watched Ahsoka and Lux walk off into the distance. Then he realized he didn't even know who Lux was. He almost pursued, but he stopped himself. Ahsoka had good instincts. Anakin then looked to R2 and smiled. He taught her most of that. It was a little joke, but reason enough to let them continue their own journey together. Thanks to the Confederacy Senate picking up where Mina Bonteri left off, there was an official ceasefire. The CIS reported their dealings with anonymous threats on their senators to the Republic, and a mutual caucus was formed, called the Peace Committee. It was meant to bring an end to the war, and eventually it would. It all started with the neutral systems recognizing the Separatists as a unique state, one without Republic jurisdiction. Many representatives in the coalition would face similar threats, near assassinations or death for doing this. This would cause the Jedi to break their alignment with the Republic, and send multiple knights to different planets to protect various political leaders, because no one inside the Republic was dealing with these threats. Obi-Wan was of course sent to Mandalore for the next several months. The whole situation with Ahsoka gave Anakin a lot to think on, and while the Clone War fizzled out, he would focus training Gunji. There would be multiple attempts to turn him to the dark side, but like Ahsoka, his Wookiee student was well trained, and survived his run-ins with Cad Bane, Boba Fett, and Bossk. The Trandoshan ended up dying to the Jedi Wookiee. Palpatine's plans fell further and further until General Grievous, ordered by the Separatists, demolished the banking clans. It was a strike that turned the Separatist powers, the conglomerates, against each other, and caused a complete and total economic collapse galaxy-wide. However, it did fully end the war. Maybe not the most efficient way to do it, but the rooted systematic problems in the galaxy were uprooted and given a chance to be fixed. Grievous wasn't super pleased with the turnout, and he was tasked by Sidious to do some egregious things, but eventually Master Kit Fisto would help seal his fate. Inversely, due to the Death Watch getting mangled by the Molinus 10, Maul and Savage would never be found, left to drift aimlessly in space for eternity. The slaughter of the witches also happened while Luxx and Ahsoka hit on Sereno. Palpatine's rise to power was erased away from him after being 5 years over term. The Republic, as a result, elected a newer, more bureaucratic senator to fill his role, someone with connections to the other banking conglomerates. It was entirely a political move started because of the financial crisis in the galaxy. Didn't help that the Republic deregulated all the banks months before anyways. Palpatine would have a pretty awful week, losing power and Grievous almost at the same time. But he would work himself with Anakin and attempt to gain control over the Jedi Knight. Skywalker, though, was pretty frequently stationed on Coruscant, leaving Palpatine to try and force his hand with Padme. Eventually, Anakin would lead the Jedi back to the Sith Lord, and it would result in the final showdown to end the Sith. Skywalker, from this, would rise to the Council Chambers for the next 6 years, where he would preside as a leading voice in the Jedi Order. When Gunji finished his training, Anakin would abandon said order. It was good timing too. Due to Anakin stationing on Coruscant for the longest time, there wouldn't be any happy accidents. So by the time he and Padme did have children, it would be planned for, and they'd only have a single daughter named Leia. Outside of the total collapse of society and the fall of the Sith were the two young lovers. They committed themselves to each other, and Luxx eventually figured out that he needed to stop pointing weapons at his freakishly talented partner. They would actually live on Cantobite for a couple of years with R7-A7. They set up a scheme to steal from the rich and give to the poor. So in a weird way, they were like poor philanthropists. It was a fun scheme until they got caught, but by that point, they were in their 20s with enough credits to take their old vessel and vanish again. They would continue doing this scheme on a couple of other gambling planets, only stealing from the ultra-wealthy, who specifically funded the war or gave products to the warring sides. It wasn't as hard as it sounds. Tons of people profited off the Clone War. Throughout this time, they interacted and spoke with Anakin several times. He eventually approved of Luxx, and they also learned about his secret marriage. Made Ahsoka feel a little bad about barring R2 for so long, but they also encouraged him to leave the Order, which is why he eventually did before Leia was born. Ahsoka and Luxx would continue to live a really prosperous life. Both were raised in the high class, and while they wouldn't ever reach that pinnacle again, even though they could, they were happy. That was what entailed of their adventures and their life. They found the most efficient ways to give back and help those in need without selling their souls to one movement or government. They were just themselves, and ever since their engagement with the Death Watch on Karlak, that's all it ever had to and ever would need to be. And that, my friends, is a pretty wholesome PP story, and special thanks to the Patrons for supporting the channel. Smash that like button. Let's talk about the wholesome PP. So, this was a weird dynamic to work with. They don't get like a whole lot of interaction screen time, especially prior to the whole Onderon arc, so a lot of this was like based off of like a total of maybe, I don't know, 15 minutes of screen time they have together. So a little hard to work with there, but I think that it's a dynamic that actually would last longer given the time to develop. They didn't have a whole lot of time to really develop their thing for each other, and so this gives them the time to do that, mostly on Sereno, and that's where they kind of build that trust for each other. Luxx is kind of an idiot sometimes, that's why he points the weapon at her after they kill Dooku, but I really wanted this to be like a drawn-out story of them kind of finding each other. It's kind of like, in a weird way, it's like Romeo and Juliet without the suicide. Like, they kind of find each other, it's like kind of forbidden thing because she was a Jedi, and they don't kill themselves, so it's like a good time for everybody. I really wanted the moment between Ahsoka and Anakin to reflect the Jedi Temple scene when she leaves the Order. I think that scene needed to be reflected like a lot, because I think Ahsoka in this scenario really finds herself and is really content with herself. I think for a long time, between Rebels, Bad Batch, Tales of the Jedi, and wait, she's in every fucking show actually. Between every show, from the Clone Wars to Ahsoka, she doesn't really find herself and just becomes Ahsoka the White, and that's what I wanted her to find in this. And it's not because of Luxx she finds herself. She finds herself because she's doing something she loves with a person she cares about. And I think that's the big difference in this, that she finds herself because she's doing something positive that she actually cares about, and she's not just meandering around. And I think that has to be stated. I think she finds herself because she's happy with what she's doing. So I hope you all enjoyed this story. I love you all, spread the love, and always remember, my friends, that the Force be with you.